Alright, so you want to get into PC gaming but you're kinda on a budget? Don't worry, the RX 570 has got you. In this video we'll be taking a look at the RX 570 and how it performs in mid 2020. The RX 570 was originally launched in April of 2017 at around a price of £180. Unfortunately, back then, due to crypto mining, prices of the RX 570 and 580 increased dramatically. However, it's 2020 and the price of these cards are back down to a very reasonable state. On the used market, you can find a 4GB version of the RX 570 used for around £90, with some as low as £65 and £120ish for a new model. The 8GB model of the RX 570 can be found for around £125 used and from £140 new. If you search up the RX 570 on YouTube, you can see that it's a very popular card and there's a lot of budget builds being built around it. If you can finesse a good deal, congrats, you made it into PC gaming. Today we'll be testing the Asus STRIX RX 570 with 8GB of VRAM. This card was bought new for around £135. This RX 570 is packed with a core clock of 1178MHz, a boost clock of 1310MHz, 20148 stream processors, a HDMI port, 2 DVI-D ports and a single display port. It uses a 8-pin PCI Express power connector with a recommended PSU of 450 watts. We will be pairing the RX 570 with the Ryzen 2700X. We also have 16GB of DDR4 RAM at 3000MHz, all on an X570 motherboard. We know that this doesn't really sound like a budget build, but this is the only CPU we had at the moment. And if you're planning to build a budget PC, pairing the RX 570 with a Ryzen 5 1600AF, which is around £90, would be the best combo. Well, let's get right into the games test. At first, we have the recently released game Valorant running on high settings with an average FPS of around 130 to 140, with the frame rate sometimes dipping down to 110 FPS. The gameplay was very smooth, and on low settings, the game runs well over 180 FPS and maxes out over 210 FPS. Next up, we have Overwatch at epic settings with everything maxed out, and it runs magnificently at around 80 FPS and with some dips down to the low 70s. After epic settings, we have ultra settings on Overwatch. The game runs well, of course, at around 110 FPS, with it sometimes dipping down into the high 90s. Finally, we have high settings on Overwatch, running well over 134 FPS with many high spikes into the 170s and sometimes the 200s. You could set a frame cap if you wish to have a 24/7 144Hz gameplay. Taking a look at Grand Theft Auto 5, it is running at a decent frame rate on very high settings with mostly everything maxed out in story mode, and we were getting around 80 to 100 FPS. At times there were dips into the high 70s. We also tested out GTA Online with the same settings and the FPS was similar, but most of the time it was around 75 FPS. Modern Warfare is next. We will be only looking at multiplayer in this video, but Warzone runs pretty similar in FPS. Firstly, on high settings with everything maxed out, we were getting around 70 to 80 FPS. The game sometimes dips down to the low 60s, but during my playthrough the FPS was always over the standard 60 FPS. On low settings on Modern Warfare, on the other hand, we were getting around 100 to 115 FPS. The lowest the FPS went down with low settings was around 94 FPS. Now it's time to take a look at the popular car football / soccer game Rocket League, which had over 165 FPS with everything maxed out. The FPS was usually around 160 to 170, with it sometimes decreasing to 140 and maxing out around 195 FPS. However, on low settings, the game was at a nearly constant 250 FPS. 250 FPS is the frame cap in Rocket League, so the frames wouldn't get any higher, but the FPS may sometimes dip down by 1 or 2 frames. And to finish off the games test, of course we need a racing game, and here we have Forza Horizon 3 running on ultra settings with everything maxed out with a constant 60 plus FPS. I didn't see the FPS go over 70, but at the same time I didn't see it go under the standard 60 FPS. On high settings though, Forza was running over 90 FPS with the frames sometimes dipping down into the high 80s. Alright, so in conclusion, the RX 570 is 100% a great card to buy if you want to get into 1080p gaming under £150. Also, just like Nvidia cards, this AMD card has features which allow you to record and save instant replays of your games for free, and the software also allows you to stream your gameplay to your favorite streaming platform. Another positive of the RX 570 is that it is VR ready. Unfortunately, I don't have a VR to show off any tests, but there are a lot on YouTube with some VR games running pretty well on the card. Even though I am using the 8GB version of the RX 570 in this video, there are frame rate tests for games with the 4GB version and the results are actually very good. However, games are getting more demanding each year, and I'll suggest you buy the 8GB version instead if possible, and if you can snag a really good deal. The only negative about this card is that if you buy a used one, make sure you contact the seller and ask them about the conditions of your graphics card, as it may have been used for mining. Anyways, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in a bit.